The cradle of Western civilization. Ancient Greece is often called the cradle of Western civilization because it laid the foundations for many ideas, systems, and cultural traditions that still shape the modern world. Although it existed thousands of years ago, between roughly the 8th century BCE and the 4th century BCE, its influence continues to be visible in politics, philosophy, science, art, architecture, literature, and education. The achievements of ancient Greece were not limited to one area. They transformed the way people think about government, human rights, logic, beauty, and knowledge itself. Geographically, ancient Greece was located in southeastern Europe, on the Balkan Peninsula, surrounded by the Mediterranean and Aegean seas. Its mountainous landscape divided the region into many small communities known as city-states, or polis. Unlike large centralized empires such as Egypt or Mesopotamia, Greece developed as a collection of independent city-states, each with its own government, laws, and traditions. The most famous of these were Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and Thebes. This political fragmentation encouraged competition, innovation, and diverse systems of governance. One of the most significant contributions of ancient Greece was the development of democracy in Athens during the 5th century BCE. Although Athenian democracy was limited, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, it introduced the revolutionary idea that citizens could participate directly in political decision-making. This concept later inspired modern democratic systems around the world. The idea that government should serve its citizens and that people have a voice in political matters began in this ancient society. Ancient Greece was also the birthplace of philosophy as a disciplined way of thinking. Greek philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle asked fundamental questions about ethics, knowledge, justice, and the nature of reality. Instead of explaining the world through myths alone, they used logic and reason. Their methods of questioning and critical thinking still influence education and intellectual life today. Aristotle's works, for example, shaped scientific and philosophical thought for centuries in both Europe and the Middle East. In literature, ancient Greece produced epic works that remain central to Western culture. Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, explored themes of heroism, fate, honor, and human struggle. Greek playwrights such as Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus developed tragedy and drama as art forms. The structure of modern theater, storytelling, and even cinema can be traced back to these ancient dramatic traditions. Greek achievements extended into science and mathematics as well. Thinkers like Pythagoras and Archimedes made important discoveries in geometry and physics. Hippocrates laid the foundations of modern medicine by promoting observation and logical diagnosis rather than superstition. Greek scholars sought rational explanations for natural phenomena, establishing the early roots of scientific inquiry. Art and architecture from ancient Greece also left a lasting legacy. Greek temples, such as the Parthenon in Athens, demonstrated balance, proportion, and harmony. The use of columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, continues to influence public buildings around the world today, including government structures and museums. Greek sculpture focused on realism and idealized human beauty, reflecting a deep appreciation for the human form and physical excellence. Religion played a central role in Greek life. The Greeks believed in many gods and goddesses, such as Zeus, Athena, Apollo, and Hera, who were thought to control natural forces and human destiny. Myths about these deities explained the world and provided moral lessons. Greek mythology still inspires literature, art, and popular culture. Finally, ancient Greece reached its political and military peak under Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE. His conquests spread Greek language, culture, and ideas across a vast territory from Egypt to India. This period, known as the Hellenistic Age, allowed Greek culture to blend with Eastern traditions, further expanding its influence. In conclusion, ancient Greece is called the cradle of Western civilization because it introduced revolutionary ideas about democracy, philosophy, science, art, and culture. Its thinkers encouraged critical reasoning, its artists defined beauty and proportion, and its political experiments shaped modern government. Even today, thousands of years later, the legacy of ancient Greece remains deeply embedded in the foundations of Western society. Learning targets. The study of ancient Greece helps us understand how geography, politics, culture, and conflict shaped one of the most influential civilizations in history. By exploring these learning targets, students can better understand how Greek society developed and how its ideas influenced the modern world. 1. Identify the key geographic features that shaped Greek city-states. Geography played a crucial role in shaping the development of Greek civilization. Ancient Greece was located on a mountainous peninsula in southeastern Europe, surrounded by the Aegean Sea, the Ionian Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. The landscape consisted of rugged mountains, narrow valleys, rocky soil, and thousands of islands scattered across the sea. Because of these natural barriers, communities were often isolated from one another. Instead of forming one large unified country, Greece developed into many small independent city-states, known as polis. Each city-state had its own government, laws, army, and identity. The mountains made land travel difficult, which limited communication and political unity between regions. However, the surrounding seas encouraged the Greeks to become skilled sailors and traders. Maritime trade allowed them to exchange goods, ideas, and culture with other civilizations such as Egypt, Phoenicia, and Mesopotamia. The lack of fertile farmland also influenced Greek society. Since agricultural land was limited, Greeks relied heavily on trade, colonization, and fishing. Many Greek city-states established colonies across the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions to gain access to resources and farmland. This expansion helped spread Greek language, culture, and ideas far beyond mainland Greece. 2. Outline the major historical periods: Archaic, Classical, and Hellenistic. Ancient Greek history is usually divided into three major periods, each marked by important political, cultural, and social developments. The Archaic period, approximately 800–500 BCE, was a time of recovery and growth after the earlier Greek Dark Age. During this era, city-states began to form and develop political structures. Trade expanded, populations increased, and Greek culture began to flourish. It was also during this time that the Greeks established many colonies across the Mediterranean. Art, poetry, and early forms of government started to emerge, and the Olympic Games were first held in 776 BCE. The Classical period, approximately 500–323 BCE, is often considered the golden age of Greek civilization. During this time, Athens became a center of democracy, philosophy, science, and artistic achievement. Great thinkers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle developed ideas that continue to influence modern philosophy and education. This period also included major conflicts such as the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War. Greek architecture, drama, and literature reached extraordinary levels of sophistication during this era. The Hellenistic period, 323–31 BCE, began after the death of Alexander the Great. During this time, Greek culture spread far beyond Greece itself, reaching Egypt, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. Greek language and ideas blended with local traditions, creating a diverse and cosmopolitan culture. Scientific knowledge expanded, cities like Alexandria became centers of learning, and Greek influence shaped large parts of the ancient world. 3. Compare and contrast the political systems of Athens and Sparta. Two of the most famous Greek city-states were Athens and Sparta, and they had very different political systems and social structures. Athens is best known as the birthplace of democracy. In the Athenian system, male citizens could participate directly in government by voting in assemblies, debating policies, and serving on juries. This form of government encouraged political participation and public discussion. Athens also placed great importance on education, philosophy, art, and culture. Citizens were encouraged to develop intellectual abilities and participate actively in civic life. Sparta, on the other hand, had a very different system. It was a highly militarized society focused on discipline, strength, and obedience. Instead of democracy, Sparta was ruled by a mixed system that included 2 kings, a council of elders, and a small group of powerful officials. Spartan society was organized primarily around military training. Boys were taken from their families at a young age and trained to become soldiers. The Spartan lifestyle valued loyalty, endurance, and physical strength above intellectual or artistic pursuits. Despite their differences, both Athens and Sparta played important roles in Greek history. Their rivalry eventually led to the Peloponnesian War, which weakened the Greek world and made it more vulnerable to outside conquest. 4. Explain the role of significant conflicts, like the Persian Wars, in Greek history. A timeline of major eras. Before studying the details of ancient Greek history, it is important to understand that this civilization developed over several different historical periods. Each era had its own political changes, cultural achievements, and important events that shaped the development of Greek society. By looking at these eras as a timeline, we can better understand how Greece evolved from small early communities into a powerful cultural force that influenced the entire Mediterranean world. Historians usually divide the history of ancient Greece into several major eras. These periods help us organize important developments such as the rise of city-states, the growth of democracy, major wars, and the spread of Greek culture across different regions. Each era built on the achievements of the previous one, gradually shaping what we now recognize as classical Greek civilization. Understanding this timeline allows us to see how Greek society changed over time. It shows how political systems developed, how culture and philosophy flourished, and how Greek influence eventually spread far beyond its original borders. By studying these major eras, we can better understand the progress, challenges, and lasting legacy of ancient Greece. Minoan civilization, circa 2714–50 BCE, one of the earliest advanced civilizations in the Greek world, developed on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age. This civilization is known as the Minoan civilization. It is considered the first major civilization in the Aegean region and played an important role in the early development of Greek culture and trade. The Minoans were famous for their large and complex palace centers, the most well-known being the Palace of Knossos. These palaces were not only royal residences but also administrative, economic, and religious centers. They contained large courtyards, storage rooms, workshops, and colorful frescoes decorating the walls. Archaeological discoveries show that the Minoans had advanced architecture, plumbing systems, and organized urban planning for their time. Minoan society was strongly connected to the sea. Because Crete is located in the middle of the Mediterranean trade routes, the Minoans became skilled sailors and merchants. They traded goods such as olive oil, wine, pottery, and metal products with Egypt, the Near East, and other Mediterranean cultures. This maritime network helped the Minoans become wealthy and influential throughout the region. The Minoans also developed their own writing system known as Linear A. This script was mainly used for administrative records and trade documentation. However, unlike later Greek writing systems, Linear A has not yet been fully deciphered, which means historians still do not completely understand the Minoan language. Minoan art and culture were very vibrant and expressive. Their frescoes often depicted scenes of nature, sea life, religious ceremonies, and athletic activities such as bull leaping. Unlike many later societies, Minoan art shows little evidence of war or military power, suggesting that their society may have been relatively peaceful compared to other ancient civilizations. Around 1450 BCE, the Minoan civilization began to decline. Historians believe that a combination of natural disasters, such as volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, along with invasions from mainland Greeks, contributed to its collapse. Mycenaean civilization, circa 1600 to 1100 BCE, after the rise of the Minoans, another powerful civilization developed on mainland Greece known as the Mycenaean civilization. This civilization was centered in fortified cities such as Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos. The Mycenaeans were heavily influenced by Minoan culture but developed a more militaristic and warrior-based society. Unlike the peaceful image often associated with the Minoans, the Mycenaeans were known for their strong armies, fortified palaces, and warrior kings. Their cities were surrounded by massive stone walls, sometimes called Cyclopean walls, because later Greeks believed only giants could have built them. These fortifications show that warfare and defense were central parts of Mycenaean life. Mycenaean rulers controlled large territories and organized complex palace economies. The palaces acted as centers of political authority, trade, storage, and religious activities. Officials kept detailed records of goods such as grain, livestock, and weapons. The Mycenaeans used an early form of the Greek language written in a script called Linear B. Unlike Linear A, Linear B has been successfully deciphered by modern scholars. Tablets written in this script reveal information about Mycenaean administration, trade, and daily life. These texts provide some of the earliest written examples of the Greek language. Mycenaean culture is also closely connected with the legendary stories described in the epic poems attributed to Homer, especially the Iliad and the Odyssey. These stories describe heroic warriors, powerful kings, and the famous Trojan War. Although historians debate how much of these stories are historical, archaeological evidence suggests that conflicts similar to those described in the epics may have taken place during the Mycenaean period. Around 1100 BCE, the Mycenaean civilization collapsed. The reasons for this decline are still debated by historians, but possible causes include invasions, internal conflict, economic problems, and natural disasters. After the fall of the Mycenaean world, Greece entered a period known as the Greek Dark Age, during which population declined and many cultural achievements were temporarily lost. Together, the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations formed the foundations of later Greek culture. Their political organization, trade networks, architecture, and early writing systems helped shape the development of ancient Greece in the centuries that followed. Age, circa 1100 to 800 BCE, after the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, Greek society entered a long period of decline known as the Greek Dark Age. This era lasted roughly from 1100 BCE to 800 BCE and is called the Dark Age, because historians have fewer written records from this time and many aspects of culture temporarily disappeared. When the Mycenaean palace systems collapsed, the centralized political structure that had once controlled trade, administration, and military organization also disappeared. Large cities were abandoned, populations declined, and long-distance trade networks were greatly reduced. Without the palace administrations that had kept written records, the use of writing also disappeared. The script known as Linear B stopped being used, and for several centuries Greece had no written language. Life during this period became more rural and simpler compared to the advanced palace culture of the Mycenaeans. People lived in small villages rather than large urban centers, and political organization was more local and tribal. Instead of powerful kings ruling large territories, leadership often came from local chiefs or community leaders. However, the Dark Age was not only a time of decline. Important cultural developments still occurred. Greek oral traditions continued to preserve stories of earlier heroes and events. These stories were eventually written down centuries later in epic poems such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, traditionally attributed to Homer. These works preserved myths, legends, and memories of the earlier Mycenaean world. By the end of the Dark Age, Greek society slowly began to recover. Population increased, trade expanded again, and the Greeks adopted a new alphabet based on the Phoenician writing system. This development helped restore literacy and communication. These changes eventually led to the beginning of a new period of growth known as the Archaic Age. The Classical Age, circa 500–323 BCE, the Classical Greece is often considered the golden age of Greek civilization. During this period, Greece experienced extraordinary achievements in politics, philosophy, science, art, and architecture. Many ideas and institutions created during this time continue to influence modern societies today. One of the most important developments of the classical age was the rise of democracy in the city-state of Athens. In this system, male citizens could participate directly in government by voting in assemblies, debating laws, and serving on juries. Although this democracy did not include women, slaves, or foreigners, it introduced the revolutionary concept that ordinary citizens could have a role in political decision-making. At the same time, Athens became a major cultural center. Great philosophers such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle explored questions about ethics, knowledge, politics, and human nature. Their ideas helped form the foundations of Western philosophy and scientific thinking. Architecture and art also flourished during the classical age. One of the most famous buildings constructed during this time was the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena located on the Acropolis in Athens. The Parthenon became a symbol of Greek architectural perfection, known for its balance, symmetry, and mathematical precision. The classical age was also a time of major military conflicts that shaped the Greek world. One of the most important struggles was the Persian Wars, in which several Greek city-states united to defend themselves against the powerful Persian Empire. Famous battles such as Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis demonstrated the determination and strategic ability of the Greek forces. Later, internal rivalry between the powerful city-states of Athens and Sparta led to the long and destructive Peloponnesian War. This conflict weakened the Greek world and ended the dominance of Athens. The classical age came to an end with the rise of Alexander the Great, whose conquests spread Greek culture across a vast empire from Greece to Egypt and parts of Asia. His campaigns marked the transition into the Hellenistic age, during which Greek language and culture spread throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Overall, the classical age represents the peak of Greek cultural and intellectual achievement. The political ideas, philosophical debates, artistic masterpieces, and historical events of this period left a powerful legacy that continues to shape modern civilization. Athens and the birth of democracy. One of the most important contributions of ancient Greece to world history was the development of democracy in Athens. During the 5th century BCE, Athens created one of the first known systems in which citizens could participate directly in government decisions. Although this system was very different from modern democracies, it introduced the idea that political power should belong to the people rather than a single ruler or small elite. Before democracy developed, Athens was ruled by kings and later by aristocrats, wealthy families who controlled political power. Over time, social tensions grew between the rich and the poor. Many citizens believed the system was unfair and demanded reforms. Important leaders and lawmakers began introducing changes to create a more balanced political system. One of the earliest reformers was Solon, who lived in the early 6th century BCE. Solon introduced laws that reduced the power of aristocrats and helped poorer citizens. He cancelled many debts, freed people who had been forced into slavery because of debt, and reorganized society so that more citizens could participate in political life. Although his reforms did not create full democracy, they helped reduce social conflict and laid the foundation for future political changes. Later reforms by Cleisthenes in 508 BCE helped establish a more democratic system. Cleisthenes reorganized the political structure of Athens so that citizens were represented based on geographic regions rather than family connections. He also strengthened the assembly, where male citizens could gather to discuss and vote on laws and policies. Because of these reforms, Cleisthenes is often called the father of democracy. In the Athenian democratic system, citizens could participate directly in government through several institutions. The assembly was the main decision-making body, where citizens debated issues such as war, laws, and foreign policy. Another important institution was the Council of 500, which helped prepare laws and manage daily government affairs. Many government positions were filled by lottery rather than election, which was intended to give ordinary citizens a chance to serve in government. Democracy in Athens reached its height during the leadership of Pericles in the 5th century BCE. During this time, Athens experienced great cultural and political growth. Pericles expanded citizen participation and supported public projects such as the construction of the Parthenon. Athens became a center of art, philosophy, and intellectual life. However, Athenian democracy had significant limitations. Only free adult men who were citizens could participate in politics. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded from political rights. As a result, only a small portion of the population had a voice in government. Despite these limitations, the democratic system developed in Athens had a lasting impact on political thought. The idea that citizens should have the right to participate in government and influence decisions became one of the fundamental principles of modern democratic societies. Even today, many political systems around the world are inspired by the early experiments with democracy that began in Athens more than 2,500 years ago. The comprehensive legacy of ancient Athens, a deep dive. The revolutionary birth of the democratic system. The transition from tyranny and oligarchy to democratia, literally, people power, was not an overnight event, but a series of radical reforms. It began with Solon, 594 BCE, who laid the groundwork by abolishing debt slavery, and culminated in the reforms of Cleisthenes, 507 BCE, the father of democracy. Cleisthenes reorganized the population into 10 tribes based on geography rather than wealth or family lineage. This broke the power of the old aristocrats and ensured that the government was truly an expression of the entire citizen body. This system was founded on the principle of isonomia, equality before the law. 2. Direct democracy and the mechanics of the ecclesia. Athenian democracy was direct because the citizens themselves were the government. The ecclesia, the assembly, this was the supreme authority. Every male citizen over 18 was expected to participate. They met on the Paienix, a natural amphitheater, where they engaged in parrhesia, freedom of speech. Decisions weren't made by a small group of politicians. The thousands of men present would raise their hands to decide on the fate of the empire, food supplies, and religious festivals. The Bull, Council of 500, this was the engine room of the state. Members were chosen by sortition, random lottery, rather than election. Athenians believed that elections were aristocratic, favoring the famous and wealthy, while a lottery was the only truly democratic way to ensure that any citizen, regardless of status, could run the city. The dicasteria, people's courts, justice was also democratic. Juries consisted of 201 to over 1,500 citizens, also chosen by lot. There were no professional judges or lawyers. Citizens had to argue their own cases, and the jury's decision was final and could not be appealed. 3. Ostracism, the guardian of liberty. Ostracism was a sophisticated, albeit harsh, political tool designed to prevent the rise of a dictator. The voting ritual. Every year, the assembly held a preliminary vote to see if an ostracism was necessary. If yes, citizens met in the agora, the marketplace. Each man scratched the name of the politician he hated or feared most onto a piece of broken pottery, ostrakon. The exclusion. If a quorum of 6,000 votes was met, the man with the most votes was forced to leave Athens within 10 days. The purpose. This was not a trial for a crime. It was a popularity contest in reverse. It allowed the city to remove a leader who had become too powerful or whose presence was causing civil unrest. Even the hero of the Battle of Salamis, Themistocles, was eventually ostracized. IV. The intellectual and artistic epicenter, the Golden Age. During the 5th century BCE, Athens transformed into a cultural superpower. This period, led by the statesman Pericles, saw an explosion of human creativity that has never been matched. The birth of philosophy. In the shadows of the Parthenon, Socrates challenged every social norm through questioning. His student Plato founded the Academy, the world's first university, and Aristotle later systematized all human knowledge, from biology to ethics. The theater of Dionysus, Drama was a civic duty. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides used theatre to explore deep moral and political dilemmas, while Aristophanes used biting comedy to mop the very politicians sitting in the audience. Architecture and art. The Acropolis, rebuilt after the Persian Wars, became a showcase of the golden ratio and mathematical perfection. The Parthenon, with its stunning sculptures by Phidias, became the eternal symbol of the city's wealth and devotion to the goddess Athena. The epic struggle for survival. The Greco-Persian Wars, 499–449 BCE. The Persian Wars were a series of monumental conflicts between the Achaemenid Empire of Persia, the largest empire the world had ever seen at that time, and the loosely allied Greek city-states. This was a clash of civilizations, the absolute monarchy of the East versus the emerging ideals of autonomy and democracy in the West. 1. The spark. The Ionian Revolt, 499–494 BCE. The conflict began not in mainland Greece, but in Ionia, modern-day Turkey, where Greek colonies had fallen under Persian rule. The uprising. Encouraged by Athens and Eretria, the Ionian Greeks revolted against the Persian king Darius I. They managed to burn Sardis, a regional Persian capital. The Persian response. Darius was furious. He crushed the revolt, destroyed the city of Miletus, and swore an oath of vengeance against Athens for interfering in his empire's internal affairs. Legend says he ordered a servant to whisper to him 3 times every dinner, "Master, remember the Athenians." 2. The first invasion. The Battle of Marathon, 490 BCE. In 490 BCE, Darius sent a massive fleet across the Aegean Sea to punish Athens. The setting. The Persian army landed at the plain of Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Greeks were heavily outnumbered. The strategy. The Athenian general Miltiades utilized a brilliant tactical maneuver. He weakened his center and strengthened his flanks, enveloping the Persian forces. The result. Against all odds, the Greek hoplites, heavy infantry, crushed the Persians. This victory proved that the invincible Persian Empire could be defeated. It also gave birth to the legend of Pheidippides, the runner who raced to Athens to announce Nike victory, before collapsing and dying. 3. The interlude. The rise of Themistocles. During the 10-year peace that followed, the Athenian politician Themistocles convinced Athens to use a newly discovered silver mine to build a massive navy of 200 triremes, advanced warships. He argued that while Marathon was won on land, the next war would be won at sea. 4. The second invasion. Xerxes' Grand Campaign, 484–79 BCE. After Darius died, his son Xerxes I launched a massive invasion by land and sea, involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers and a bridge of boats across the Hellespont. The stand at Thermopylae. In one of history's most famous battles, King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, along with several thousand other Greeks, held the narrow pass of Thermopylae for 3 days. Though they were ultimately betrayed and killed, their sacrifice bought precious time for the rest of Greece and became an eternal symbol of courage. The burning of Athens. The Persians marched south and burned Athens to the ground. However, the city had been evacuated. The Battle of Salamis. Themistocles lured the massive, clumsy Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis. The smaller, more agile Greek triremes decimated the Persian navy while Xerxes watched in horror from a golden throne on a nearby mountain. The final blow. Plataea and Mycale. In 479 BCE, a combined Greek army led by Pausanias defeated the remaining Persian land forces at the Battle of Plataea, while the Greek navy destroyed what was left of the Persian fleet at Mycale. 5. The aftermath and the Delian League. The defeat of the Persians had profound consequences for Western history. The Golden Age. With the Persian threat neutralized, Athens entered its greatest period of cultural and political achievement. The Delian League. Athens formed a military alliance to continue the fight and liberate Ionian Greeks. However, this league eventually turned into the Athenian Empire, as Athens began using the tribute money to fund its own architecture, like the Parthenon. The shift in power, the victory gave the Greeks a sense of exceptionalism. They believed their freedom and democratic systems were superior to the slavery of the Persian Empire. 6. Historical significance. Had the Persians won, the foundational concepts of Western philosophy, democracy, and theater might never have developed. The Greco-Persian Wars ensured that the Greek cultural seed would be planted firmly, eventually growing into the Roman Empire and the modern Western world. Titans. A definitive history of the Greco-Persian Wars, 499–449 BCE. Prologue. The geometry of empire versus the spirit of autonomy. At the dawn of the 5th century BCE, the Achaemenid Empire was an unstoppable monolith. Stretching from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean, it was a masterpiece of imperial administration, governed by the great king, whose word was divine law. In contrast, the Greek world was a fragmented collection of hundreds of independent city-states, poleis, often at war with one another. The conflict that followed was more than a series of battles. It was the first great struggle between Eastern absolutism and Western individualism, i.e. the Ionian Revolt, the Great Incitement, 499–494 BCE. The seeds of war were sown in Ionia, modern-day Turkey. These Greek cities had been conquered by Cyrus the Great, but they bristled under the rule of Persian-appointed tyrants. The burning of Sardis, supported by 20 Athenian ships, the Ionians captured and accidentally burned Sardis, the regional capital. This act was seen by Darius I not as a local rebellion, but as an act of international terrorism. The fall of Miletus, the Persians retaliated with overwhelming force. After the naval defeat at Lade, Miletus was razed, its men killed, and its women and children enslaved. Darius, obsessed with revenge against the upstart Athenians, reportedly hired a servant to remind him at every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." 2. The first invasion, the miracle at Marathon, 490 BCE. Darius launched a punitive expedition across the Aegean, destroying Eretria before landing at the Bay of Marathon. The stalemate. For several days, the Persian cavalry and infantry faced a smaller force of Athenian and Plataean hoplites. Miltiades' genius. Realizing the Persian cavalry was temporarily absent, the Athenian general Miltiades ordered a daring charge. He stretched his line to match the Persians, thinning the center but reinforcing the wings. The double envelopment. The Greek center gave way, drawing the Persians in, while the heavy Greek flanks crushed the Persian sides and folded inward. It was a slaughter. 6,400 Persians died compared to only 192 Athenians. The Marathon Run. The legend of Pheidippides, running 42 kilometers to Athens to shout, "We have won," before dying, symbolizes the exhaustion and exhilaration of a city that had just saved its existence. 3. The interlude, the silver and the sea. For 10 years, Greece waited. In Athens, the visionary Themistocles foresaw that the Persians would return with a larger force. When a massive vein of silver was found in the mines of Laurium, he convinced the citizens to forego a cash handout and instead build a fleet of 200 triremes. This decision changed the course of human history. Without this navy, Greece would have surely fallen. IV. The second invasion, the earth and water, 484–79 BCE. Xerxes I, son of Darius, assembled a force of legendary proportions. Herodotus claimed millions, though modern historians estimate 200,000 soldiers and 1,200 ships. He bridged the Hellespont with boats and cut a canal through Mount Athos. Thermopylae, the gates of fire. To stall the Persian advance, King Leonidas and 300 Spartans, supported by roughly 7,000 Greeks, held a narrow coastal pass. For 3 days, they defied the Immortals, the Persian elite guard. When a traitor showed the Persians a mountain path to bypass the Greeks, Leonidas sent the main army away and fought to the last man. Their death provided the moral foundation for Greek unity. The sack of Athens. The Persians marched into Attica. Themistocles, Trusting his wooden walls, the navy evacuated the entire city. The Persians burned the Acropolis to the ground, an act that would fuel Greek hatred for centuries. Salamis, the turning point, in the pursuit of truth, the evolution of Greek philosophy. Introduction, from mythos to logos. For centuries, the Greeks explained the world through myths. The thunder was Zeus's anger, and the seasons were Demeter's grief. However, starting in the 6th century BCE, a radical shift occurred. In the trading ports of Ionia, thinkers began to ask, what is the world made of, and why does it change? This was the birth of philosophy, the love of wisdom. The pre-Socratics, the first scientists, 6th century BCE, before Socrates, philosophers were primarily concerned with cosmology, the nature of the physical universe. The Milesian school, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Thales, considered the first philosopher, proposed that water was the primary substance, arche, of all things. His genius was not in the answer, but in the question. He sought a single, natural explanation for diversity. Heraclitus versus Parmenides. The problem of change. Heraclitus argued that the universe is in a constant state of flux. No man ever steps in the same river twice. He believed fire and conflict were the engines of existence. Parmenides countered that change is an illusion. He argued that being is eternal and unchanging, laying the groundwork for metaphysics. Pythagoras. He saw the world not in matter, but in numbers. He believed that mathematics was the sacred language of the universe and that the soul was immortal and subject to reincarnation. Democritus. He proposed a shockingly modern theory. The world is made of invisible, indivisible particles called atoms moving through a vacuum. 2. The Sophists, the teachers of rhetoric. As Athens became a of truth, the evolution of Greek philosophy. Introduction, from mythos to logos. For centuries, the Greeks explained the world through myths. The thunder was Zeus's anger, and the seasons were Demeter's grief. However, starting in the 6th century BCE, a radical shift occurred. In the trading ports of Ionia, thinkers began to ask, what is the world made of, and why does it change? This was the birth of philosophy, the love of wisdom. The pre-Socratics, the first scientists, 6th century BCE, before Socrates, philosophers were primarily concerned with cosmology, the nature of the physical universe. The Milesian school, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Thales, considered the first philosopher, proposed that water was the primary substance, arche, of all things. His genius was not in the answer, but in the question. He sought a single, natural explanation for diversity. Heraclitus versus Parmenides. The problem of change. Heraclitus argued that the universe is in a constant state of flux. No man ever steps in the same river twice. He believed fire and conflict were the engines of existence. Parmenides countered that change is an illusion. He argued that being is eternal and unchanging, laying the groundwork for metaphysics. Pythagoras. He saw the world not in matter, but in numbers. He believed that mathematics was the sacred language of the universe and that the soul was immortal and subject to reincarnation. Democritus. He proposed a shockingly modern theory. The world is made of invisible, indivisible particles called atoms moving through a vacuum. 2. The Sophists, the teachers of rhetoric. As Athens became a direct democracy, the ability to persuade others became the most valuable skill. The Sophists were traveling, the pursuit of truth, the evolution of Greek philosophy. Introduction, from mythos to logos. For centuries, the Greeks explained the world through myths. The thunder was Zeus's anger, and the seasons were Demeter's grief. However, starting in the 6th century BCE, a radical shift occurred. In the trading ports of Ionia, thinkers began to ask, what is the world made of, and why does it change? This was the birth of philosophy, the love of wisdom. The pre-Socratics, the first scientists, 6th century BCE, before Socrates, philosophers were primarily concerned with cosmology, the nature of the physical universe. The Milesian school, Thales, Anaximander, Anaximenes, Thales, considered the first philosopher, proposed that water was the primary substance, arche, of all things. His genius was not in the answer, but in the question. He sought a single, natural explanation for diversity. Heraclitus versus Parmenides. The problem of change. Heraclitus argued that the universe is in a constant state of flux. No man ever steps in the same river twice. He believed fire and conflict were the engines of existence. Parmenides countered that change is an illusion. He argued that being is eternal and unchanging, laying the groundwork for metaphysics. Pythagoras. He saw the world not in matter, but in numbers. He believed that mathematics was the sacred language of the universe and that the soul was immortal and subject to reincarnation. Democritus. He proposed a shockingly modern theory. The world is made of invisible, indivisible particles called atoms moving through a vacuum. 2. The Sophists, the teachers of rhetoric. As Athens became a direct democracy, the ability to persuade others became the most valuable skill. The Sophists were traveling teachers who taught rhetoric and debate. They were often relativists, believing that man is the measure of all things, Protagoras. To them, there was no absolute truth, only what you could convince others to believe. This moral flexibility deeply troubled the next great thinker. 3. The Big Three, the pillars of Western thought. 1. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens, 469–399 BCE. Socrates wrote nothing down. We know him through his student, Plato. The Socratic method. Instead of lecturing, Socrates asked questions to expose the contradictions in people's beliefs. He believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. Ethics. He focused entirely on human virtue and how to live a good life. He famously, Plato, circa 428–348 BCE, was one of the most important philosophers of ancient Greece and a key figure in the development of Western philosophy. He was a student of Socrates and later became the teacher of Aristotle. Plato lived during a time when the Greek city-states, especially Athens, were experiencing political instability, wars, and debates about democracy and justice. These events strongly influenced his philosophical ideas. After the death of Socrates in 399 BCE, which deeply affected him, Plato began to write philosophical dialogues in which Socrates often appears as the main character. Through these dialogues, Plato explored questions about truth, justice, knowledge, ethics, and the nature of reality. One of his most famous works is The Republic, where he discusses what a perfect society should look like and how it should be governed. One of Plato's most important philosophical ideas is the theory of forms. According to this theory, the physical world that we see with our senses is not the true reality. Instead, it is only a reflection or imperfect copy of a higher and more perfect world of forms, or ideas. These forms are eternal, unchanging, and perfect. For example, there are many different beautiful objects in the world, but they are all imperfect versions of the perfect form of beauty. The same applies to justice, goodness, and other concepts. Plato believed that true knowledge comes from understanding these perfect forms rather than relying only on our senses. Another central idea in Plato's philosophy is his concept of the ideal state, which he described in The Republic. Plato believed that society would function best if it were ruled by philosopher kings, leaders who are wise, educated, and capable of understanding truth and justice. He divided society into three main classes: rulers, philosophers, guardians, soldiers who protect the state, and producers, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. Each class had its own role, and justice existed when everyone performed their role properly and in harmony with the others. Plato also emphasized the importance of education. He believed that education should be long and carefully structured so that the most capable individuals could eventually become philosopher rulers. This education would include mathematics, philosophy, and logical thinking, helping people move from ignorance toward true knowledge. In addition to his philosophical writings, Plato founded the Academy in Athens around 387 BCE. This was one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world and functioned somewhat like a university. Students there studied philosophy, mathematics, science, and politics. The academy remained an important center of learning for many centuries. Plato's ideas had a huge influence on later philosophy, science, and political theory. His works continued to shape the thinking of philosophers for thousands of years, and many modern discussions about knowledge, ethics, and government still refer to his ideas. Because of this, Plato is considered one of the foundational thinkers of Western intellectual history. Aristotle, circa 384–322 BCE, was one of the most influential philosophers and scholars in the history of Western thought. He was born in the Greek city of Stagira in northern Greece. His father, Nicomachus, was a physician who served at the court of the king of Macedonia, which meant that Aristotle grew up in an environment connected with science and medicine. This early exposure to scientific observation and study likely influenced his later interest in biology and the natural sciences. When Aristotle was about 17 years old, he traveled to Athens to study at the famous philosophical school founded by Plato called the Platonic Academy. Aristotle studied there for about 20 years. During this time he became one of Plato's most talented students. Although he respected his teacher greatly, Aristotle eventually developed ideas that differed from Plato's philosophy. While Plato focused on abstract concepts such as the world of ideal forms, Aristotle believed that knowledge should come from studying the real, observable world. After Plato's death in 347 BCE, Aristotle left Athens and spent several years traveling and conducting research. During this time he studied plants, animals, and natural phenomena. His work in biology was especially important because he carefully observed and classified many species of animals. Unlike many earlier thinkers who relied mainly on speculation, Aristotle emphasized empirical observation, meaning that knowledge should be based on careful study of the natural world. Around 343 BCE, Aristotle was invited by the king of Macedonia to become the tutor of the young prince Alexander the Great. Aristotle educated Alexander in philosophy, science, literature, and politics. Although historians debate how much influence Aristotle had on Alexander's later actions, the relationship between the philosopher and the future conqueror is one of the most famous teacher-student relationships in history. After several years, Aristotle returned to Athens and founded his own school known as the Lyceum. At the Lyceum, Aristotle and his students studied many different subjects, including philosophy, logic, politics, ethics, biology, physics, and rhetoric. Aristotle often taught while walking with his students through the school's gardens and paths, which is why his followers became known as the Peripatetic school, from the Greek word meaning, to walk around. One of Aristotle's most important contributions was the formalization of logic. He developed a system of reasoning called the syllogism, which is a method of logical argument where a conclusion is drawn from two related premises. For example, a famous logical structure attributed to Aristotelian reasoning is, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore, Socrates is mortal. This system of logic became the foundation of logical thinking and was used in philosophy and science for nearly 2,000 years. Aristotle also made major contributions to the natural sciences. He studied animals, plants, anatomy, and reproduction, and attempted to classify living organisms based on their characteristics. Although some of his scientific conclusions were later proven incorrect, his method of observation and classification helped lay the foundations for scientific research. In ethics, Aristotle introduced ideas that remain influential today. In his famous work Nicomachean Ethics, he argued that the ultimate goal of human life is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, or human flourishing. According to Aristotle, people achieve this not through pleasure or wealth alone but through living a life of virtue. Virtues such as courage, honesty, and generosity help people develop a balanced character. Aristotle also introduced the concept of the golden mean, which means that virtue lies between two extremes. For example, Courage is the balance between recklessness and cowardice. Aristotle also wrote extensively about politics. In his work Politics, he analyzed different forms of government and argued that humans are naturally political animals, meaning that people naturally live in communities and societies. He studied many different city-states and compared the political systems in order to understand how governments function and how they can best serve their citizens. Aristotle's influence on Western civilization has been enormous. His writings shaped the development of philosophy, science, medicine, logic, ethics, and political theory for centuries. During the Middle Ages, his ideas were studied and expanded by scholars in both the Islamic world and Europe. Enduring legacy. The philosophical traditions established by Plato and Aristotle created an intellectual legacy that has lasted for more than 2,000 years. Their ideas shape the foundations of Western philosophy, science, politics, and education, and their influence can still be seen in modern academic fields, political systems, and methods of scientific inquiry. Because their works addressed fundamental questions about reality, knowledge, ethics, and society, later generations of thinkers continuously returned to their writings for guidance and inspiration. One of the most important aspects of their legacy is their impact on philosophy itself. Plato's works, especially The Republic, raised deep questions about justice, the structure of the ideal state, and the nature of truth. His theory of forms suggested that beyond the physical world there exists a higher level of reality consisting of perfect and eternal ideas. This concept influenced many philosophical traditions, including Neoplatonism and later Christian philosophical thought. Plato's dialogues also introduced a style of philosophical writing where ideas are explored through conversations and arguments, a method still used in philosophy today. Aristotle, on the other hand, focused more on the observable world and developed a systematic approach to knowledge. His work in logic established rules for reasoning that remained dominant in European education until the modern period. Aristotle's method of organizing knowledge into categories and disciplines also influenced how universities later structured academic studies. In many ways, Aristotle helped establish the idea that knowledge should be gathered, classified, and analyzed in a systematic and rational way. Their influence also extended strongly into science. Aristotle studied animals, plants, physics, astronomy, and many other aspects of nature. Although some of his scientific theories were later replaced by modern discoveries, his emphasis on observation and classification helped inspire the development of the scientific method. Scholars for centuries relied on Aristotle's descriptions of the natural world when studying biology and natural philosophy. Another area where their legacy remains powerful is political theory. Plato's vision of a perfectly ordered society ruled by wise philosopher kings introduced the idea that leadership should be guided by knowledge and moral understanding. Aristotle, meanwhile, analyzed many real political systems and attempted to understand how governments function. He studied different forms of government, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, and discussed how each could either serve or harm society depending on how power was used. These early analyses helped lay the groundwork for later political philosophy and the study of government. The educational institutions connected to these philosophers also had a lasting effect. Plato founded the Platonic Academy in Athens, which functioned as one of the earliest organized centers for higher learning. Aristotle later founded his own school, the Lyceum, where students studied philosophy, science, rhetoric, mathematics, and politics. These institutions helped establish the idea that knowledge should be systematically taught, discussed, and expanded within academic communities, an idea that eventually evolved into the modern university system. During the Middle Ages, the works of Plato and Aristotle were preserved and studied by scholars in both Europe and the Islamic world. Their ideas influenced medieval philosophers such as Thomas Aquinas, who integrated Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Through translations and thank you for your attention. I hope everything was clear.